Ollie, thanks for sitting down with me today.
It is a real pleasure. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So I just got back from my honeymoon and I read a ton of books, like five, six, seven books, while I was traveling, while we were traveling. And the first thing that I read,
Congratulations, by the way.
thank you, appreciate that. The first thing that I read on the flight to from here to Vietnam was your case study.
Mm.
I think it's 100 and something page case study, which I was really excited to read, and that's about your business, story learning, and it made me think a lot throughout throughout the whole honeymoon because
Oh no.
in a good way, in a good way. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there, and there's a lot of stuff that I want to talk to you today about. But first, I just want to read a few lines from the first page because I think they summarize in a really fascinating way what you managed to build. So on the first page, it says, here's what story learning eventually turned into: a $10 million education business, profit margin of 50% or more, fully bootstrapped with zero investment or debt, an audience in the millions monthly, and with books on the shelves of every major bookstore worldwide. My workload, about 6 days a month. Wow, I love it. It sounds like many entrepreneurs' dream. So, first of all, good job.
Thank you.
And what I think is really interesting is if we just kind of start at the beginning, my understanding is that you used to be a teacher.
Yeah, well, I mean, originally I was a jazz musician, so my very first career was playing jazz. I was a professional jazz musician for about 6 7 years, and then I packed that in and I became an English teacher. So I moved from London to Japan to teach English. So took that quite seriously. Did lots of training, did a master's degree, eventually diplomas, all those kind of things. Became a teacher trainer, and I spent 7 years as a teacher and a teacher trainer, moving from Japan to the Middle East. I lived in Qatar and in Egypt as well. So yes, very heavily involved in teaching. And in the background throughout this whole time, I was also learning languages, and that was really my favorite thing to do, was just learn languages. And so when I eventually began my main business, Story Learning, it was really combining that background as a teacher and the ability to communicate, which is what teaching teaches you, with
Mhm.
the knowledge base of languages, and that was kind of my start, really.
Was that always? It's not the most common path for teachers or for musicians to start a sizable business, right? It's usually my mom works at a school as well. A lot of musicians, you say the starving artists, right? Was that always a dream for you to become an entrepreneur, or
Yeah,
how
no,
did
not
that
not not at
come about?
all. I mean, I think the thing is that the interesting thing about the internet is that the internet has given creative people a way to build a career on off the back of your creativity, and this didn't exist before. So I'm very much an accidental entrepreneur, really. What I The way that I got started was I was working this job in the Middle East, and I was bored, man. I was just really bored. I was a manager of teachers at that point. It was not fun, and I just had this need to create. I missed my teaching days when I would be in the classroom in front of people teaching. It's a very creative thing to do, I missed that. And so the reason I started blogging was because I had this creative outlet that I just needed. And then so really for the first couple of years, all I was doing was blogging. I was writing about my ideas on language learning, teaching what I knew about language learning. And I think really that's no different to what an author does, or a musician does, or a painter does. It's creating.
Hmm.
And I think the the thing that created that pathway through from that creation or that artistry through to the business itself was the fact that I combined that creativity, that need to create, with a more practical side, which is just to think, okay, this blogging thing can make money. Okay, let's look at that. And I just went down and I discovered, I researched it, I followed it, I learned about it. And so I was able to kind of learn about and apply the business side to the thing that I was already doing. But if it wasn't for that creative element, I would never have done it, because the need that I had was a need to create fundamentally.
Hmm. Interesting. Was that So then going down the path of being an entrepreneur and monetizing your skills and selling, essentially, was that was that difficult at first? Was that a struggle? Because I think often selling doesn't come natural to many people, right? And yeah, especially when coming from a very different background, how did you how did you learn the skills, but also the mindset, right? I think it's just a very different mindset that you need to have when you
Yeah.
start kind of selling your products and selling yourself.
Listen, I took courses. I took courses from other
Mhm.
people on how to sell. I mean, the very first course I ever took was well, actually, I took a course on blogging and like how to how to blog properly. And that wasn't really selling so much, but it did get me thinking about niche and positioning a little bit. And then when I launched my first product, I took a course by Jeff Walker on how to do what he calls a seed launch, which is how to create a product from scratch with no product or list or anything. Part of that was included how to sell, and he would give a script to follow, literally a script. Talk about this, then talk about this, and talk about this. All the component parts of a sales message, really. And I would just follow the process. And I think through really up from the stage of starting up until the business doing six figures in revenue, I was just taking courses and applying. Like, I think what I did well is I applied what I learned. So when I needed to create a course, I took a course on it and applied it. When I wanted to learn to automate the selling of that, so I could sell courses on Evergreen, I took a course. I applied it, and I just continued with that. I've always been quite good at taking courses and applying the things that I learn, and it's all there. I mean, there's so many people out there selling courses on how to do cool stuff. It's all there for the taking. I get the feeling a lot of people are not very good at applying the things that they learn.
Mm.
I've always been quite good at that, and so I think that's maybe it's just a kind of a general advantage I've had from my personality type, being someone who's practical enough to take a course and apply it. Maybe that's all really that I needed to get started. But I guess also specifically on the point of selling. I mean, of course, I was very nervous at the beginning. I remember writing my first sales letter. It was actually a VSL, not a sales letter. That's the way Jeff Walker taught it, anyway. And it was terrifying. But I think I understood that it had to be, that sales was necessary in order to sell something. I could understand that logically. And so I was able to hold my nerve for long enough to just, get the video done, send the email and collect the money. And then it gets gradually easier from there every time you do it.
All right, before we continue, I want to take a second to talk about our sponsor. I've always been saying that one of the best ways to learn about business is by working closely with a smart and successful entrepreneur, and this might be your opportunity. Our sponsor is a company called Judge Me. Judge Me is a Shopify product review plugin, and they're the number one plugin on Shopify. They're literally, if you look at the Shopify App Store, they're in the first spot. They're bootstrapped, and they managed to outcompete other companies that raised hundreds of millions of dollars by just being smarter and building a better product. They were started by PJ, who was also a guest on the Founders Lounge, episode 54, so I recommend you to check it out. They recently moved their headquarters to London, and they're looking for smart people to join them. They're looking for product managers, engineers, and they're looking to fill other roles as well. So check out careers.judge.me and see if you find any role that you like and apply. So that's careers.judge.me. Now, enjoy the rest of the episode.
Every time you do it.
Yeah, it does. I remember it was the same with me, for example, just with this podcast, right? When I started doing it, it was like 2 or 3 years ago. And it's not so much selling, but it's still, well, it's not selling at all. It's not selling at all, but you're there on the camera, being out there. And I remember how much in the beginning, I was extremely uncomfortable. I was like, oh my God, like everyone's going to see it and it's probably weird and I'm like saying strange stuff and whatnot. But I think you grow so much as a person through that. And that's one thing that I absolutely love about entrepreneurship in general, because it constantly pushes you in different directions if you choose to, I suppose, that you just grow as a person so much, right? And now I just appreciate the fact that I'm, fairly comfortable on camera and reaching out to guests and promoting the podcast as well and things like that, right? So
yeah, my friend Scott says that the purpose of entrepreneurship is to achieve the highest version of yourself, and I think it's completely true because it teaches you so many things from managing yourself, your own personal management, through to learning to do sorry, to presenting, public speaking, through to understanding money and finance, through to managing people and motivating people, through to understanding what it is that you want from your business and from life, which is something that I try to address a little bit in the case study that you mentioned. And this is something that many people just don't ever get to thinking properly about. What is it exactly that I want from this life as an entrepreneur? And the punchline is, for most people, it's not money. They think it is, but it's not. And so entrepreneurship teaches you, I think, to just, it forces you to think through these big questions that otherwise it's very easy to go through life not really examining.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm noticing the same thing. I think money is often what gets you in. You're like, oh, I want to be more comfortable. I want to buy all these things. I want to be more financially secure, whatever it might be. But then eventually you realize, or at least that was my experience. It's like, well, I don't necessarily need that much money, but I love the growth and the experience of it. Just the experience of doing something, creating something in the world, and yeah, just growing as a person through that. Right. So if we go back a little bit, so that's how story learning kind of started. And then when was there any moment when it really started taking off? When what, or was it just kind of gradual growth, or was there something when you said, okay, now this is it. That's going to be that's the
Yeah.
real business now.
So most of the trajectory of story learning really was quite gradual. If you look at our various traffic and revenue charts, it's pretty smooth line. But I think for the first few years, it was just me and a few assistants. Really, I didn't really think of it as a business at that time at all. It was essentially just a monetized personal brand. But then everything got a lot faster once I started building a team, and I realized that building a team was a very gradual process. But because I've always been inquisitive and I've always been trying to learn about what I needed to do next and build next, I embraced the team building thing once it became a necessity within the business. And once the team got put in place, that's when revenue started to grow, really, really quite quickly. And that's and then now I meet a lot of entrepreneurs these days, and I see that pattern over and over again. When you start to build the team, that's when things get big quickly, because you have adults in the room, people focusing on proper tasks, proper roles, and that was definitely the case for us.
And okay, so we come to today. Today, the business does 10 million or so in revenue per year.
Yeah, so I don't talk about specific revenue levels. I describe the business as being a $10 million business in enterprise value. We do 7 figures in revenue, 7 figures in profit. So, that's the scale of the business.
Nice. So one thing that we mentioned before on what says in your case study, and I think it's a very interesting number, is relatively high profit margins, right? Which is something that, if you're comfortable talking a little bit more about that, the reason I'm saying is I know a lot of business owners who are very happy with 10%, 20%, maybe 25% profit margins. And they're like, okay, well, that's good. That's where we cannot push it to higher profitability or whatever it might be. So I'm just curious how you think about that, or even as much as you can share how you get to that kind of profit margin.
Yeah, so obviously this is business model dependent, and if you're running an agency, you have very different natural margins to an early stage SaaS product or a late stage SaaS product or an online business. Assuming that we're talking about a company that has is based around information products of different kinds, whether that's courses, memberships, coaching, that kind of thing, then my belief is that an online business should be operating with at least 30% profit margins. And the main reason is that you don't have any of the traditional infrastructure that you would expect from a restaurant or somewhere that has large numbers of staff, physical premises, high cost of goods, things like that. And so if you're running an online business with lower than 30% profit margins, you're under optimized based on what's possible. And the danger with that is that when times get bad, you can then really struggle, because if you're only operating 10% margins, then it only takes relatively small fluctuation in either what you can charge or what it costs you to fulfill on those products to put your business in the red very quickly. But with a 30% profit margin, you always have buffer. You have room to maneuver. You have flexibility, and it's even better, obviously, if you're at 40, 50%. Now, the nuance there, though, is it depends what mode you're in. So there's a deeper conversation to be had. So, for example, right now in StoryLearning, we're running 35, 40% margins. And the reason is that we're investing a lot more into growth. So when you're in growth mode, you will expect to reduce your margins quite a lot. So, if you have a big new, if you can see a way to grow your business, but it requires investment, then you might be willing to reduce your margins, substantially for a period of time, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, perhaps. That's kind of the phase that we're in right now. But then if I wanted to, I'd have the ability to cut right back on expense, on staff, and then we would be able to run, really around 50, 60, 65% margins if we chose to. So you've got the kind of natural dynamics of the business model, and then from there it depends. What you need to understand really is what stage of growth you're at, and so often what happens is that you have a fast growing business may have fairly low margins for 2 or 3 years when they're growing, but then cut back and enter a phase of profit mode where you say, right, we've grown, we've stabilized the business. Now it's time to actually collect the profit that we're due, because most online businesses are not going to exit. They're not being built as high growth startups with where the exit is the game that's being played. It's not that for most people. And so good profit has to form part of the equation. And so on that point, for most founders, if you say that, okay, statistically you are not going to exit your business, most businesses never sell. That means that as founder, you have to have a strategy for taking some money off the table. Otherwise, you could be in growth mode potentially for the entire life of the business, never take any money off the table yourself. And then, something could happen, have another pandemic or a cyber attack or whatever, the business fails, and you've taken no money off the table as founder. So for most businesses, to summarize this, for most online businesses, you want to have margins of at least 30% so that you're running the business efficiently, and so that as founder you can take money off the table so that you're gradually over time diversifying, so that you don't have 99% of your net worth tied up in a business that's never actually going to sell. So margins they're a big deal, and it's kind of difficult to really understand, I think, until you've been at a few different stages of business and been involved in a few different companies and actually had to go through that process of thinking what it means to have a particular net margin in the bigger picture.
I think one thing I'm noticing as well, at least in our case, is because we have a business that's a little bit similar to yours, right? So we also produce online courses or online educational materials, and we do 7 figures in revenue now. We hit 7 figures this year. But what I'm noticing is, we spend a lot on advertising, right? So I think in your case, you probably get much more organic traffic. In our case, our organic is very weak because we started with Facebook ads, and that's still our main source of acquisition, right? You start somewhere and then you start building other channels when the time comes. One thing that I'm noticing is I'm expecting the profitability to also increase over time when our email database becomes bigger, right? Because anything you sell to your email database is essentially pure profit, right?
So, I mean, all this question of profitability and acquisition costs and all of it all forms part of the economic model of the business. You need to have an understanding of what is the kind of the beginning to end economic model, and that has to include you have to factor all of these different things in. So paid traffic is an interesting one because, you see, everyone who runs paid traffic wishes they had organic, and everyone who has organic traffic wishes they had paid for different reasons, right?
Yeah.
If most of your business is run through paid ads, that's great. And, by the way, congrats for getting to where you've got to. That's a fantastic achievement. The two interesting things to think about, I think, are number one, how can we start to build out our organic content so that we can diversify, de-risk away from paid traffic, because the paid media is always changing. It's changing quickly, so it is a significant risk factor. But then there's also the question of the back end, and really, if you could, the way that I think about paid media in StoryLearning, for example, is that all of our main digital products, which obviously have zero fulfillment costs for us, they are there to cover the cost of advertising, but our profit then is on the back end with higher ticket, more expensive things like coaching, like certifications and things like that. So the way that most most businesses that run through, and it's difficult for e-commerce because you have different unit economics. But for information-based businesses, the thing for if you're running mostly on paid media, the thing to do is to focus aggressively on building out a back end that can
Mhm.
become your profit margin, because then you can get to more reasonable returns.
That makes sense. We're not there yet because I mean, it's like step by step. I think the way I see it is you do build the front end first, just to have that acquisition machine, right? And then
Yeah.
you start building out the back end. Another thing from your case study that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about is, and by the way, I strongly encourage everyone to read, to go to your website and download the case study, because I think it's such a, you could be selling that as a book, I'm pretty sure, but it's just a
Yeah,
free,
people keep telling me it should be a book, but
yeah.
the problem with the book is that you can't change it, and I like to kind of go in and tweak things and make little changes and things like that.
So one thing you mentioned is, so you have a specific system, right, or how you help people to learn a language through stories, and that's sort of your moat, right? That's what's unique about your methodology and about your business, and I think that's really important. And you said it took you a long time to figure that out, what that methodology is going to be, or how,
Yeah.
what is going to be unique. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that process and how you actually got to that.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, so StoryLearning is a business where we teach foreign languages to English speakers, right? So if you're British or American, or you speak English, English is an operating language for you. We teach you foreign languages. So for us, that would mean Spanish, French, Italian, Japanese, Chinese, etc. And the language learning space is a big space. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry with big players like Duolingo. Everyone knows them. Rosetta Stone. Very, very big players. What we do is we have a very specific USP, which is that we teach languages through stories, and that's a very big differentiator, because virtually no one else does that. And it's quite appealing to people, because most people fail at language learning, right? Because they think it's a memory game.
Mm,
But actually, I think they realize, people who try to learn languages realize that this memorizing stuff is just, there's something inherently wrong with it. It's too hard. It's too easy to forget stuff. And so
yeah.
people are naturally drawn to the idea, at least, that learning a language through stories kind of makes sense. And so that's what we do. And then everything within our ecosystem is done with stories. So our content is based on stories. Our books that we have in shops are all books of stories. Our courses are stories. And the reason we do that is because when we have a customer who comes in and likes learning with whatever thing of ours they've consumed, we then have a whole range of other things for them to consume, all with the same method. So it's like a whole experience. Like if you go to Disneyland or something, you can go on a Disney ride, you can buy a Disney toy, you can go to a Disney restaurant. It's all for a Disney fan. You're in heaven. We try to recreate that same world, but it took me quite a long time to figure this out. And even right at the beginning, when I first took my very first blogging course, I remember everyone was hammering on, like, you got to have a niche, but not just one niche, but like 2 layers deep. So you're not just dog training, you're dog training for, like, I don't know anything about dogs. I don't know, dog training for rescue dogs, but not just that. It has to be
Mm,
dog training for rescue dogs who like cheese or something. I don't know. You have to kind of niche down into a couple of different ways. And I understood that theoretically, but I just couldn't think how to niche down
mm,
with languages, because I thought, well, I don't really have anything. Like, I'm just, I like languages, but how do I niche down? I thought that anything that I chose would just be for the sake of it, and it just felt unnatural. And so for many years, it was just me. Like, it was just Ollie. I was just making videos about what I think. And I know now that what I was building was the personal brand. I was building a personal brand, right? So that's why I was able to get traction, because anyone building a personal brand can get traction just based on their personality. So I put the issue on ice. I hadn't found that niche yet. But then over time, I started producing different types of content, and stories was one of those things. And it resonated very, very strongly with my audience. And so I started to develop that idea. And
mm,
I started off by publishing books, actually. And then once the books were popular, then I started to create courses, and then started to make our content based on courses, our content based on stories as well. So it was a very natural progression. And it wasn't until 2019, I think, so 6 years in, that we came up with the term story learning to define
mhm.
how we were teaching. I think we actually came up with the term in 2017, 2018. It was another year or two until I had the confidence to then rebrand our entire website, change the name to a 301 redirect of the URL, new branding, everything, and to double down on that. When I did, it was the best decision I ever made because it just unified the brand. But and obviously worked like that. It was like a year-long project in order to do it properly. So it was a big deal. But from 2013 when I started to 2019, 2020, it was like six years to actually land on that concept. So I always say to people, like, be thinking about it, but don't worry, don't let it stop you. Like, don't stay up at night
Mm,
thinking about it, because in my case, it took me 6 years. And I think this kind of plays more broadly into the idea that, whenever I see people talking about growing quickly and say, how can we 10x this year? It's like, I always say, man, just what's the rush? Like, there's no rush. If you just take your time and go slowly, you'll figure these things out in the natural time it takes. And really, the most important thing is to stay in business and to keep trying to improve.
mm.
And time is your ally in so many different ways. So yeah, I mean, we got there eventually, but it took a long time.
It's I can't tell you how many times I've been in that exact same situation when you're
Yeah,
starting something new or thinking about a new idea and you're like, okay, but we need to niche down. How are we going to niche down? And for
yeah,
some reason, that's just a very difficult exercise to
it's
figure
incredibly
out.
hard. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Because ideally, you
because
want it to be based on substance as well. That's
yeah,
that's the problem. When people say, "Okay, you have to niche down," it's like, okay, well, should I just invent something for the sake of it? And that was always my resistance to this advice. Like, I don't want to. That would be inauthentic just to try to niche down. So I think in many ways, active experimentation and trying things
mm,
out, seeing what fits, is the best way forward. But also, by actually creating something, starting to sell it, and
mm,
getting feedback from customers, getting to know your customers, patterns start to emerge over time. So the more stuff you sell, the more you realize kind of who your stuff is resonating with, and that can lead you to the niche. So again, like, there's no rush, but it's good to be thinking about it fairly
mm.
proactively.
And just moving forward, I think that's a mistake that I often see in people who are just starting or thinking about starting, right? And they're like, oh well, but I need to find the niche, or I need to find that perfect product. And I'm always saying, no, just do something, and then by doing that something, you're going to always learn a little bit more about your audience and a little bit more about yourself and a little bit more about the market. And then, yeah, you'll probably be losing money in the beginning, and that's fine. I actually think that's a good thing in the beginning, because it just hurts a little bit when you're losing money and you're investing your own money into that project in the beginning. And I think that kind of keeps you thinking and on your toes and moving forward. But I think yeah, just gotta do something and gotta keep moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, action is always the thing that rescues you at the end of the day. If in doubt, just take more action, and then just
Yeah,
with your eyes open.
yeah. You recently posted a Twitter thread with a bunch of lessons that I thought were really, really good. So, what I would like to do is I would like to go through a few of those and just have a quick chat about some of them, because I'd love
Yeah,
to hear a bit of a deeper dive
sure.
on some of them. I notice you're quite active on Twitter, LinkedIn as well. So, a lot of good content there also for everyone who wants to follow some business advice. He said, surround yourself with young, hungry people who will go the extra mile. It makes everything easier. I 100% agree with that. I got a lot of value out of that. I've learned things from them. We hired people like that. They are sometimes hard to find and hard to identify. When you
Yes.
find somebody, it's sometimes hard to identify, is this that kind of person or not? Sometimes you see it, sometimes it's obvious, right? But sometimes it's not. I'm curious how you think about it or how you go about that.
Yeah, so we always hire from within our audience. Always. I mean, well, not. I mean, most of the time. And the reason is
Mm,
that people who come from within your audience, they not only understand what you do, but they're there because they enjoy it. And so, just from a perspective of attitude, they are already in a very different, starting from a very different point to, for example, someone who you find on LinkedIn ads, right? And one of the hardest things to train for is attitude or aptitude. And so by hiring from within your audience, you you just kind of cut out this layer of people who are just applying for a job because they want the money. So from there, this is one of the big benefits of building an audience. Beyond it's one of the hidden benefits of building an organic audience is that when you do want to hire, you have a bunch of people to go out to, and to you have a pool to fish from. And so what I've found is generally people from my audience, so the really enthusiastic people, will tend to reach out anyway. Now we're kind of so big that I don't have much contact with my audience on a kind of small scale, so it's difficult for me to identify those people. But almost everyone who work, we have 15 permanent members of staff at StoryLearning. Almost all of these people I've identified, they came from my audience initially, or some kind of connection to my audience. And if we advertise a job now, we'll get over 1,000 applications within a week. And after we've been through a shortlisting process, inevitably we end up with people who are not only incredibly familiar with the brand, but also incredibly enthusiastic. And
Mm.
there's always 2 or 3 people within our audience who fit that subset. And so it's a benefit of having a strong brand that appeals to people and makes them want to follow you. And then from there, it's a case of you're just looking for those young, hungry people. I've actually found more recently they're not always young. I mean, some of our best people are actually older than me. Recently, I've made a couple of great hires of people who are certainly older. The point about the kind of young, hungry person, though, is that the young, hungry person can join. So they're usually quite early on in their career. The opportunity there is to have someone join you who can devote themselves to working with you, and you can bring them along on the journey and reward them in lots of different ways. But because of their youth and hunger, they're the kind of people who will stay up till 2 a.m. the day before a product launch to get stuff finished. They'll stay on at the weekend, not because you ask them to, but because they're committed to it. And just in general, this kind of energy I found can make the insane energy of like one committed individual can make up for, say, 4 or 5 people who just don't have that level of commitment. And it's just a really, really strong asset to have as within the business. And I've seen other people mention this a lot as well. And for me personally, I'm 42, and I've definitely noticed that in the last few years, I just don't have the energy and ability to work 12-hour days like I used to. But I noticed that for younger people in the business, like, they can do that all day long and they're perfectly happy to do it. And if you give them responsibility, they'll want to do it and they'll relish the challenge. And so I've really noticed and appreciated that in them. And so I think it's something that's very, very good to keep your eyes open for.
Agree. It's not anything we've ever done, but I think we should. One of my business partners, he has a bigger personal brand, so we hire some people through his personal brand. But yeah, it makes sense if I think about it. So I don't know, I used to be a big fan of Tim Ferriss, for example. So if he would post, send an email and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a this and this person," and I would think that I could possibly fit that role, I'll be to the moon happy, right?
Yeah.
To apply and to have a chance to work close with somebody who I admire or somebody who I've learned from.
The other way you can approach this, and we've done this in the past as well. In fact, we usually do this. Is people say don't hire until it hurts, or only hire when it hurts. And I think from the perspective of staying lean at the beginning, that makes a lot of sense. But once you have 5, 10 people on your team, I found that it can be very good to hire proactively into needs that are emerging. And we've done this. For example, a few years ago, we felt that we were getting a bit stretched on the marketing front. Things were still okay. We were still holding it together, but we just felt like, if not now, then by this time next year, we're really going to need someone in place. And so we actually took the decision to proactively hire someone at that time. And I don't remember whether it was part-time. I think it actually was part-time at the beginning. Yeah, it was part-time at the beginning. But we went out and we looked for someone before we needed it. And that person now has been with us for years, and they're a full-time member of staff and a really valuable team member. That becomes more. Doing something like that really creates energy and optionality within your business, and it helps you to move a lot quicker once the bottlenecks emerge. And it's something that there's a lot more affordable once you're already at some kind of scale. If you're doing 7 figures already, then to bring on someone on a part-time basis, is easily affordable. So you're not going to notice the expense that much, but it does create some very, very useful options further down the road. And so that's also something worth thinking about. Now, how can we proactively hire into these different roles before we need them, so that we can actually identify and filter people with enough time and not doing it in a rush because we need someone tomorrow?
Hmm. It's interesting. It's something that I'm often a bit conflicted about within our company. It's often we could see that it would be useful to potentially hire, or we know that maybe in a few months we're going to need somebody, some new person in one role. But we also come to the question, it's like, well, that increases the complexity. There's one more person to manage. There's one more person in the hierarchy. Can we possibly do it without that person? Can we just cut some things that we don't necessarily have to do? So it's all, and sometimes it's obvious, right? Sometimes you just need another person and you need another person. But yeah, sometimes I see we're debating that decision a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like, well,
So
should we?
the way to think through this is really from the perspective of what's the opportunity cost, right? So if you're on a growth trajectory, if the business is growing 20-30% a year, and you expect that growth to continue, then actually there's more at stake by not hiring, because not hiring has the
Mm,
potential to throttle the business and slow down your growth, right? That is far more risky than hiring an extra person, and who you can always cut if you need to. But if you're on a growth trajectory and you expect to grow, then actually, if you weigh up the cost of hiring that person versus the cost of slowing down your growth, one is usually far more potentially costly than the other. So that can be a good way of thinking about it.
I think that's a very, very fair thing to say. Yes,
It's difficult because it's hard to calculate precisely, but I
it
think
is.
this
Yeah.
kind of takes you into, this is like I felt it's been a kind of evolution of thinking that I've learned from, personally, I've learned from mentors of mine who have pushed me in different directions, push me in the way that I think about stuff. At the beginning, you're always kind of very focused on individual metrics, like what's the ROI on this, what's the ROI on that. But then once you get a bit more familiar with the dynamics of your business and your business model and how growth works, you can start to formulate beliefs in things. So for example, one of my core beliefs is in the value of audience. So for my newsletter, for example, I'm not really selling anything I have one digital product, but it's like not much. I'm basically not selling anything on my business newsletter brand at ollyrichards.co. All I'm doing is building audience. So I'm here on this podcast now in the hope that some people will come and follow the newsletter because it's growing my audience, right? And my belief is that 2-3 years down the road, if I choose to, that audience could then become a business of some kind, but I'm just not
Mm.
doing it yet. And so because of that belief, I'm investing, I've invested 6 figures this year just in audience growth, sponsorships, advertising, things like that. That's money. Like technically that's a loss, right? I'm just spending that money and I'm not making anything back. But my belief is that by growing my audience and nurturing that audience over time, that's storing up value for the future. And so to apply that kind of thinking to, you can apply that to any part of the business that you like, right? So in your case, if you believe in the dynamics of your business, if you believe that you're growing, if you believe that the activities that you are engaging in will result in growth further down the line, right? You can't track that yet. You can't see that in your
Mm.
Stripe account. But if you have that belief and it's solid, then that is worth cold hard cash, actually, and probably a lot more than that. And so if you start to map that onto the cost of, say, hiring an employee, you can kind of make it a bit more tangible. But it really helps to start to develop and articulate these beliefs around, what is it that we're doing and what exactly do I believe, because that can really guide you a little bit more in being decisive around decisions where the numbers aren't always so obvious.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense, and very good analogy with with building the audience on a different business, get the kind of investment that you need to make in order to get the results out of it later down the line, right?
Yeah, and in that case, for example, I could easily save money by, I have an expensive video editor who's making videos for me every month. Like I could easily say, oh, I'll just do it myself. I could save money
Mm.
on that. I'll just edit the videos myself. But what I'm really doing there is, it costs me, thousands of dollars a month for this video editor. But what I'm really doing is just saying, like, I fundamentally believe that the value, that the money that I'm spending to have these videos done well and the audience that I would grow from off the back of that, I fundamentally believe that will translate into a more valuable audience further down the line. And
Hmm.
so there are always so many ways to save money, but if you save money, then what the price you pay is you slow down growth. And so it's like, okay, well, what exactly do I want? Like, do I want growth, or do I want to save money? And earlier I said, like, don't be in a rush, and, and that's also true. Then it's just a question of, okay, well, what's the balance exactly? What's the balance that I'm aiming for? Do I just want to go slow and take my time, or do I want to keep growing? And then the more you can develop these beliefs, the easier it is to act on them.
That makes sense. You mentioned mentors before, that you learned a lot from your mentors, and
Yeah,
that's also something that you talked about in the Twitter thread that I was talking about before. You said two somewhat relevant, related things. You said never go for longer than 12 months without a coach or mentor,
yeah,
and you said whatever problem you face, look for the person who's already done it. I mean, those things, two things, are a little bit similar, and I've that's something I've learned a couple of years ago, that every problem you have there's somebody who already solved that problem. So your skill just needs to become finding that person and getting them on a call with you, or at least cold emailing them and hoping that they're gonna reply and give you some insights. So yeah, I'm curious, how do you think about it, and especially maybe how do you go about finding those people, both like maybe mentors in general or people to help you solve a specific problem? Because that's, I think, in theory everyone understands that. It's like, yeah, I would
yeah.
love to have a
It's
mentor,
really
but it's
hard.
always the tricky part is like, how do you find that right person?
It's really, really hard. I mean, the mentor I'm working with right now, is I pay him six figures a year for mentorship, and he built and sold a company that's quite similar to mine for nine figures.
Hmm.
And having access to that experience and knowledge is just you know it's just incredibly valuable. There's actually no price tag you could put on that, because that knowledge is so scarce, right? I'm willing to pay whatever it takes to get access to that, so that I can continue to learn. Like, what I want to do is to continue to learn myself. That's what I want, right? But I only met this person last year, and so I think it's one of the hidden values, again, in just doing a lot of networking. And I think I went through a period of time building my company kind of in isolation. I didn't know that many entrepreneurs. I was just doing things based on what I thought was right, and that was great, and it worked. But I kind of feel like if I were to go back, 5 years, I would spend a lot more time networking, going to events, paying to get into rooms with smart people. Because the day that you do meet that mentor, that person who's just got that little bit more experience than you, it just changes everything. And that one lesson that you mentioned, never go for more than 12 months without a coach or a mentor. The reason I say that is because many times over, I have gone for more than 12 months, and I inevitably end up kind of feeling lost as a result of that. I kind of realize, okay, hang on a minute. I've I've lost my way. I'm just working inside my mind. But what I really need is I need someone to sort of just point me in the right direction.
Hmm.
And so that's a rule that I've instated for myself now. I never go for longer than 12 months without that person who can help you grow. Because again, it's the hidden cost. Like, having a good mentor is expensive. I mentor business owners from time to time, and I charge a lot of money for it, because my time and more my attention is but a very high cost on that. It's expensive to have mentors, but it's even more expensive not to learn the lessons, because then you can spend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years trying to reinvent the wheel, when,
Hmm.
like you said, there are people who not only know what the wheel looks like, but where to get it and exactly what size and shape it should be. And so, that comes down to that cost it's the opportunity cost, right? Just like with not hiring that person slightly in advance of when you think you might need them. The same thing with the mentors. Like, yes, you can figure it out by yourself, but you're going to take 10 times as long to do it. And lots of other things can happen in the meantime. So it's not easy to find these people. Networking generally is the answer.
Networking, researching a lot. So I'm also working currently with somebody who's in a let's say involved with a similar business, but much bigger. And yeah, we're paying him $1,000 an hour, which I think is an enormous amount of money, but it's a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, those $1,000 per hour are paying themselves back over and over again. So it's
Yeah.
not
It's also
it's
helpful
a
not to
fairly
think
easy decision.
of it in terms of hourly as well. So the way that I might think of it, let's say you're turning over $1 million a year, and then you could ask yourself, okay, well, what for a $1 million revenue business, what do I believe is reasonable to pay a mentor in order to continue to learn to grow? And you could say,
Mm,
right, what 5% of revenue, say. Do
mm,
you think it's reasonable to reinvest 5% of revenue into learning and education? I'd say yes,
mm,
most
mm.
definitely it is, right? And so on that basis, you can afford 50 grand a year to pay a mentor.
Yeah,
And so
I
if
see.
you meet them once a month, then that's actually, once a month for an hour, then actually you could afford to pay them 4,000 an hour for the time. And it would be worth it because it's not about the time, it's about the ideas that they give you. And
Mm,
sometimes with mentorship, like you can go for like 3, 4, 5 hours without anything all that useful. And then there's one thing that they say that changes everything. And
yeah.
it's often the way.
Yeah, that's with the things the mentors say, and it's also with just networking in general. One thing I often say is like it's like the conversion rate on the website, right? Only 3 out of 100 are going to convert, and it's the same with networking with people you meet. It's like, well, you need to meet 100 people, and 3 of them are going to change your life, but 97
Yeah.
you're going to forget about them, and you're never going to talk to them again, and that's just
Yeah.
how it is. That's the
It is.
the
It's like
law of the
like
nature.
like my friend Andy used to say, you have to roll the dice.
Yeah, yeah, and every once in a while you win. Okay, another point that I thought was really interesting in your Twitter thread is take your personal finances seriously, maximize every tax break, and automate everything. I love that because for two reasons. One is that I'm currently just rearranging, reshuffling the business ownership and the personal finances, and I've just been thinking about it a lot. And it's a topic that I kind of hate because I just don't know much about it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I know a little bit about investing, and I invest my savings, but there's so much and all the accounting and all the compliance, and I feel very uncomfortable often with that. So I'm curious, yeah, if you can expand on that a little bit, as much as you're comfortable to share. What do you do with your personal, like with your savings or with your investments? How do you what do you do with your money? Essentially, that's often a
Yeah.
question that people ask. Is like, well, once you make all that money, what do you do with it?
Yeah. Okay. Well, man, how long do we have? I could take like an hour to answer this question. So
We'll do a separate episode just on personal finance.
yeah, let's just zoom out for a second and talk about why it's important to think about personal finance. So entrepreneurs, the problem with entrepreneurs is that they're very good at starting things, but not good at managing things. And so what typically happens is they're very, very focused on making money and then they're also very, very good at spending money. And so what happens is a lot of entrepreneurs, all they do is they focus on growing their business, but they don't actually save or invest any money personally. And so, like we were saying earlier, they end up in a position where they have this 7-figure, 8-figure business, but have no money personally. Now, when you remember that most businesses don't sell, and statistically, you will not sell your business, then you only have one way to become financially secure, and that is by finding a way to extract capital from the business to own it personally. This is not we're not talking about greed here or necessarily trying to become mega rich, but just to balance things out. Because if you are, I know so many entrepreneurs who live very, very frugally, they're still a college student or something. That mindset will eventually cause problems within the business. If you're running a 7 or 8 figure business, but then you're still living in a tiny flat somewhere trying to save money on your rent because you don't take any money personally, or you're worried about what happens if the business dips because you have no savings, like it's a bad place to be. And if you want to retire one day, if you want to stop working, or if you want to have if you want to be able to support yourself or a family, whatever it may be, then you need a lot of money invested in order to do that. So for example, if you want to have an amount of money invested, investments of different kind that can pay us an annual salary of say 100,000, then you need to have 2 or 3 million invested, returning say 4 or 5% annually in order to sustain that. So you need a lot of money in order to be able to sustain a lifestyle. And so if you're never taking any money off the table, then you're kicking the can down the road, and you're ending up in a place where your only option becomes selling the business. But because most businesses can't sell and they're not structured to sell, you probably end up selling it really cheap. And like basically, it's just not thought through. And so one of the best things for people to do is actually to sit down and figure out, what are the numbers I need to reach here? How much money do I need to take off the table? And yes, that means you have to pay tax. Nothing wrong with tax. Tax is the cost of doing business. You have to pay tax, you have to take money off, and to rebalance it. I fundamentally believe that you have to look after yourself and invest in yourself as an individual as well, not the company. The purpose of the company is to create wealth for the owner. That's what it exists for. Yeah, I know you want to change the world and you want to make the world a better place. Yeah, fine. But the purpose of the company is to create wealth for the entrepreneur. So if you believe that, and not everyone does, lots of people still want to scale and sell and all of that. But if you believe that, then the question is, right, well, how am I going to do it? And for entrepreneurs who are spending all day, every day inside the business, they don't want to be coming home and thinking about savings and investments personally at the weekend. They haven't got the headspace for that. So what I recommend people do is to take a bit of time to set up, to understand what allowances they have, and to set up those things on autopilot. So that's automations within the business and your business bank, personal bank, that the money moves every month between the business to you personally, and then off to however you choose to invest that money. And you just set it and forget it. I was advised to do this back in 2017 when I started making a bit of money really for the first time in my life. And I went to see an advisor who advised me to do this. And I'm so grateful he did, because basically since then, I have been automating the tax allowances that we have here in the UK. So here in the UK, you can invest a certain amount every year in your pension, which the company can pay for as a tax deductible expense, and you can have a certain amount that you can put in tax-free savings. And we're not talking mega bucks here, but it's 60 grand, recently gone up to 80 grand in total that you can do there between your pension and your tax-free savings account. And I set this up on autopilot and have been doing that now for about 7 years. And that is starting to add up to a really significant amount, because it's just been set up on autopilot and is just accumulating somewhere. I don't never look at it. I never touch it.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's on autopilot, it's happened every single month for 7 years. And if I had to transfer that manually every month, I wouldn't do it. I would completely forget. So it's the automation that does it for you. And so step one is to figure out what are the allowances and entitlements that you have, the tax advantageous entitlements, and then as much as you can, then pay yourself that on autopilot every month, and just forget about it. So that's how I approach it on a very fundamental level. And that's something that everyone can start doing, whether even if it's just, say 500 quid a month, everyone can start doing that right now.
Even as an employee, that's something I was doing even as an employee, right?
Yeah, employees have to do it exactly. As a business owner, you usually have the ability to do a little bit more, which is cool. But the thing about these allowances is that they reset every year. So if you're forever kicking the can down the road, when you choose to start doing it, you've now lost all these years of allowances. And so again, time is your friend, because let's imagine you do that for 10 years and you save up, over 10 years, you could save up 7 figures in investments over that period of time. And so let's say you've got that. Even if you don't invest any more, well, you can just leave it there, and compound interest will do the rest over time. For me, I like to take my risks within the business, but with personal finances be super conservative.
Mm-hmm.
I think the businesses are for making money, and then investing is for keeping your money. So I don't do crypto, I don't do NFTs, any of that nonsense. I just very, very straightforward, low cost investments, because the thing that I'm optimizing for there is longevity, keeping in the market for as long as possible, because that's how you make the most money. Warren Buffett made 99% of his net worth after the age of 60 or 65, because it just sat there and just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So you're not going to make much money with your investments, but you will keep it. Your business is for making money. And so, that's where I like to take the risks.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I love what you said. You said I take risk in a business, and I try to not take risks outside of my business in personal life, which I actually never thought of it like that. But I think it aligns with how I see things as well, with my philosophy. It's sort of safer in a way to take risks with a business.
Well, it's under your
And then
control. Think about it like this. I mean, a business, there's no limit to what you can do in a business. I mean, a decently performing business grows 20% a year. A mature business, you could expect to grow 10,
Mm.
20% a year. As an entrepreneur, if you're 6, 7 figures, you can grow 50, 100% a year. It's all down to you and it's under your control. So you have the ability, in terms of return on capital, if let's say you invest 100 grand of either time or money or capital into a business, you can grow that by 100% and you can make an extra 100 grand within a business. You have the ability to do that. In the public markets, really, the range you're playing at is on the low end, you might make, say, 4 or 5%. At the absolute top end of stellar performing investments, you might be looking at, say, 12%. Like that's pretty much the best you can hope for. Again, leaving aside gambling, like crypto and NFTs, which is just gambling, it's pure gambling. Leaving that aside, like there is, in order to get more than 7 or 8%, which is the historical average of long-term returns in the public markets, you have to take huge amounts of risk, investing into new emerging technologies or markets or whatever, and the reward is an extra few percent, maybe. So there's no upside on the table for doing that. So it's better to be super conservative, optimize for longevity, for saving on fees, and play the long game. Play the game of, I'm going to keep my money and I'm not going to lose it.
Yeah, that's the ultimate thing there. Like, try not to die, right? Who it was, Charlie Munger who said that? Tell me where I'm going to die. So
Rule
I never
number
go there.
1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, see rule number 1.
Yeah. So once you made it, just try to not lose it. Right?
Exactly.
All right, let's see which other thing we can dive. Another thing that I thought was really interesting, and I saw you mention that a few times, maybe on Twitter and as well as in the case study, was there are no business problems, only mindset problems. So I wonder, when you're faced with a problem, what does that mean? How do you go about solving it?
So any problem that you look at, you can only see within the limits of your current knowledge, right? So for example, let's take the case of paid ads that we mentioned earlier. So lots of people struggle to be profitable with paid ads because their mindset is, right, I've got to find an offer where I can get break even ROAS on the front end or within 3 days or something like that. And so they'll try all these different offers and they'll cycle from one offer to the next offer and they'll keep burning things down and trying new ads. And the whole time they're trying to get to break even on their ad spend. Now, a more experienced entrepreneur will come along and say, okay, what's our ROAS here? 80%. Okay, so we're losing a bit of money, right? But if we add this, if we instead focus our attention on building out the back end, then we can get to not only break even, but probably 100% ROAS through doing that. And so the mindset there is totally different and has a completely different effect on the outcome. And you can take this way of thinking and you can scale it to any element of the business. So the way that you think about finance, for example, the way that, like, what is your understanding of margins? What's your philosophy on margins? A lot of people will think, well, I just want to make, say, 20 grand a month profit so I can live my life. And as long as it doesn't go below that, I'm happy. That's a mindset thing. It's a scarcity-based mindset thing, right? But what if you could take, say, 10 grand a month for 6 months, invest that extra money, and then later make 30 a month? And so it's the mindset that determines the way that you approach any given problem. And so if you fixate on one thing, then you have a certain set of answers. But as soon as you expand and you look at different things, then you have a different set of answers. And it all comes down to the way that you look at the problem yourself.
How do you discover that, though? Because I think the problem with mindset often is you just don't even realize that you can see something from a different perspective.
Yeah, that's why
we're talking about, we get back to mentors and coaches, right?
That's it, mentors and coaches. I mean, reading. Yeah. I mean, reading is great as well. I mean, the regular education sources. So reading books, reading in-depth blogs. This is the kind of thing that I try to provide in my case study that you mentioned earlier. It's like in-depth thinking behind what are the decisions. You can get this stuff from reading, but the advantage of mentors is that coaches. So coaches and mentors are very different. Coaches can help you, generally will help you understand the problem yourself from the inside out. Mentors have been there and can just tell you what to do. That's the big difference between the two. So generally, if you want the quick answer, then speed to solution, then the answer is mentors. There are other ways of doing it. You can have board members, for example. You can have investors. If you sell equity to experienced investors, you can get them that way as well. But generally speaking, Mentors are good because there's an agreement there where they know that they're going to be devoting time. And what you really want to get from mentors is not just their time, but it's their attention. When someone's paying you every month, or sorry, when you're paying someone every month, they're not just turning up for the hour. They are focusing on the overall business situation. So my mentor, for
Mm.
example, often texts me at random times and says, "Hey, I've just thought about this thing. You should do this,"
Uh-huh.
because it's on his mind. And so what I'm
Mhm.
getting is far beyond just that 2 hours that we talk every other week. It's much more about the attention of someone who's smarter than me on my business. And that's how you learn to expand your mindset with
Mm.
any given problem.
One thing that I also do with the mentor that I'm working with right now, I do the other way around as also. I'll sometimes just send him something, not so much of a question, but more of a, hey, here's what happened, or hey, we implemented that thing that you said, and here's how it worked. Or for example, usually before we have a call, I'll send him a list of like what I want to talk about, and here's some data, and like here's some information that I already figured out myself. My thinking behind that is, if he has the time to read that before, at least that's how I function, especially if I can read something before the call, that's at the back of my mind. I'll think about it a little bit before. I won't have that pressure on the call to perform or to deliver. It's
There
so
you go. Yeah.
I expect a much better outcome out of that by giving him the space and the opportunity to be more prepared on the call as well. He doesn't have to be, but at least there's an opportunity for him to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's an interesting topic that speaks to meetings in general. I mean, I don't know if you've heard this. The way that they run meetings at Amazon apparently is that they, before any team meeting,
Hmm.
they'll circulate the agenda, but not
Hmm.
just the agenda, the specific challenges to be discussed. And before the meeting, everyone has to read it and submit their proposed solution,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
that when everyone gets together and meets, they're not even discussing the problem anymore. They're just discussing, okay, who has the best solution. And
Yeah.
I'd love to say that we are that efficient at story learning. We're not. It requires some real discipline to run your meetings like that. But it makes all the sense in the world, right? Because it's just like teaching, actually. So getting back to language teaching, people often think, if I hire a Spanish teacher, then that teacher will teach me Spanish. Not true. Spanish you have to learn by yourself, going out, speaking to other people, studying books, listening to material. What the teacher can do is help correct little things or help you notice things, but they're not going to teach you. It's a very similar thing, where ideally you want meetings to be something where you don't, like, the most efficient meeting is one where all the thinking and hard work has been done in advance, and
Mm.
then the meeting is
Yeah.
simply like a decision making
Yeah.
tool.
It's so another book that I've read during the honeymoon was The Great CEO Within by Matt Machari. If you have you heard about it?
I haven't heard about it. No.
So Matt Machari is a guy who he was a coach, still is a coach to some of the biggest startups in the US. I think he mostly works with Silicon Valley, and I don't remember the specific companies, but I think he coached the founders of Coinbase and like Reddit and
The
like
big
some of the
guys.
biggest,
Yeah.
the big guys, the big guys. So incredibly respected guy in Silicon Valley. And he wrote a book about the general things that he needs to teach pretty much in every single company. And it's extremely practical. A lot of it is just like, here's how you run meetings, here's how you run one-on-ones, here's how you structure the agenda,
Oh, right.
here's how you
Yeah.
solve conflict. It's like very, very, step by step, this is what you need to do. It's really like a
Interesting.
formula for how to run the business, just the day-to-day of the business, right? So you still got a lot of other problems to figure out, but here's just how can you be efficient. And he's suggesting a very similar structure also for meetings, how everyone needs to submit the agenda in advance. I forgot the details, but I was also thinking, I was like, man, I don't know how
Oh, yeah.
on earth we
How
can implement
organized you
that.
have to
It
be, right?
sounds
Yeah.
great. I would love to do it. It's
Yeah.
maybe we'll experiment with it at some point. I don't know. I would love to give it a try, but it's like incredible discipline and commitment
Yeah.
from the whole team. And
It is discipline. I wonder sometimes whether, if you're in a massive company like a Coinbase or a Reddit or something, if you have real industry pros there, whether there's a
mm,
sense where their time is so valuable that the idea of wasting a time in meetings is just like anathema to everybody. So I wonder whether, with businesses, with smaller businesses like ours, it's too convenient to just enjoy chatting, basically,
yeah, yeah, no,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's part of why we do stuff, right? So, but I can imagine that, if you have executives that you're paying, whose salary is like 2 million a year plus bonuses, and so you
Yeah.
don't want to waste their time in unnecessary meetings, and maybe they would also demand more efficiency. I mean, I don't know. I'm guessing,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's certainly. I would certainly like to be part of meetings like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. So I don't want us to go on for too long, but maybe just a few quick questions for the end. Number one book or course or personal experience or something that most impacted, that had the biggest impact on your career and or life.
I would have to say, actually, the $100 Startup by Chris Guillebeau, and the reason that had the highest impact is because before I read that book, I didn't know that it was possible to earn a living doing something you love. And it was actually when I read that book that I first had the idea to start my blog. So without a doubt, that's the one that's changed my life the most.
I feel like I read it, but I can't remember exactly. I'll need to look it up.
I mean, I read it 10 years
uh,
ago, so it's I don't know if it's still around.
all right. What's an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love?
I'm a huge fan of Japanese food, and I every month I tend to. So I don't live in London, but I go to London often. Like I'm going to be there 3 times, basically every week in the next few weeks, for example. At least once a month, I go and I eat in very very fancy Japanese restaurants where all the staff are Japanese, and the food is like you walk in there and it's basically like just like Japan. I used to live in Japan for 4 years.
Mhm.
I speak Japanese, so it's a big part of my life, and I'm just a massive geek for all things, not all things Japanese. Actually, I'm not like into manga or anything like that, but just Japanese culture, Japanese cuisine, Japanese sake, or Japan itself. I'm a big fan, so I spend a lot of money on Japanese food.
Didn't you just come back from Japan? Do I remember correctly?
Yeah, yeah, I was there.
Yeah,
I was
you
there
did.
2 weeks ago. I went. I went away for like 10 days or so. Went to some of the hot springs around Mount Fuji and the Izu Peninsula. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Nice. Well, Japan is very high on my bucket list. I've been fortunate to travel quite a bit throughout my life, but Japan just didn't manage to get there yet. But I think it's a place that I'd also love. One last question. What is one of the most worthwhile investments of money, time, or energy you've ever made?
You know what? We've mentioned it a couple of times already, but the case study of my business is something that I wrote last year and has had an incredible impact, or like an impact way beyond what I expected. So this is the case study that you get when you join my newsletter, and it's free and it's long. It's about 100. It was, I think, 117, 118 pages. When I first wrote that, I actually planned it to be like a 10-page document or something, like a lead magnet.
That didn't go
That didn't
according to
go according
plans.
to plan at all. As I started writing it, I just quickly realized that I had to write. It was like an exorcism, you know. I just had all of these 10 years worth of thoughts and ideas that I'd never expressed, because this business personal brand, I only started it, 9 months ago, so it's very new, and so I've never really talked about a lot of this stuff. And so when I started writing this case study, it's just all this stuff started like pouring out of me. And I spent about 3 or 4 months writing it and editing it. And it was really just that it's, that piece of work that you just have to write, that work you just have to do. You can't stop yourself. Like,
Mm.
I don't know if other people have this, but I think creators tend to have this, like when they want to make something, they just do it. So I just couldn't stop. I spent like 3 or 4 months writing this thing. It has been the single most impactful piece of content I've ever created in any business. Mostly because what I found is people have been sharing this thing among themselves and friends. And like every week I get so many emails from people saying, "Oh, this guy just shared your case study." And I go and check out, who's this guy? I've never heard of him. Some, like, huge influencer in Argentina or something. What the hell? And then I got people like very kind of heavy hitters in the industry sort of following my YouTube channel and signing up to my email list and then sharing it around. And it sounds terribly conceited to talk about this, but I was genuinely shocked by just how much referral there was from this, because I've never really experienced that so much before, like with our other stuff. Well, we have referrals at StoryLearning, obviously, but I've never experienced having created something where people kind of just share it around each other so much,
Mm.
and it's been incredibly gratifying, and I just never expected it to happen, and it hasn't had any particular tangible benefit beyond growing my audience, I guess, because I don't sell anything. But it's just been very nice to see, and it just made me realize. You know what it's made me realize is, if you create something that's truly unique, the universe will find a way to share that and put it in front of the people who need to see it. And I've never experienced it before. I've known that it's possible, but this was the first time I've actually experienced it.
Nice. And it's, I mean, I would say unique, but also high quality. I mean, it's clear that you put effort into that and that you got a decade of knowledge to share in that case study, right? So that's incredibly valuable. And
I'm just curious, do you remember how you came across it in the first place?
I remember I recently subscribed to the newsletter of, what's his name? The slowpreneur guy.
Justin Welsh, perhaps?
Justin Welsh, exactly. And I've been following him on socials for a long time, but for some reason I just subscribed to his newsletter, and you had an ad in his newsletter.
Okay.
And and again, it's the kind of thing that I don't know, it's one of those things that you feel like you never look at the ads, but I did for some reason. I read it, and for some reason I clicked on it.
Yeah.
And I found you, and I was like, oh, this guy's in the UK. He should come on the podcast. He sounds interesting. And that's how that's why we're here now, and that's how I found your case study. Yeah,
perfect. Yeah, well, that was the intended effect. So I'm glad that it happened that way. But yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that the case study was a part of that, and that had that been a quick 10-page PDF or something, you probably wouldn't have had the same impact. So anyway, it's just that's been one of the things that's kind of just really had a big impact recently.
Nice. And I think just, you said nothing tangible came out of it, but it's just I think just the network that you build, and the personal brand that you built through that. For me personally, I mean, my personal brand is significantly smaller than yours, but it just, the podcast and just being out there a little bit and organizing events around London from time to time, that alone to me is incredibly valuable for two reasons. One is there are all sorts of opportunities that come your way because of that. And number two is just the interesting people that you meet, right? Be it mentors, or be it just somebody who inspires you by the things that they're doing, or somebody who becomes your friend. I mean, to me, that's one of the most valuable things in the world. It's Absolutely. About the people you meet and the people you hang out with and learn from.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. All right. Well, Olly, it was a huge pleasure. I've learned a ton during the podcast, as well as from the case study and just from following what you're doing. So thanks a lot for coming on. And I'll see you around London.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for listening until the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like the content, please do me a favor and click the like button on YouTube, or give us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Leave a comment. Subscribe if you want to hear more from us. That really helps also to get the podcast out there, and that helps me get more interesting guests and create even more interesting content. So I really appreciate if you do that. If you have any other comments, questions, feel free to message me. You can find me on Twitter. That's usually the best channel. The link should be somewhere in the description. And check out my Twitter. I try to tweet interesting stuff about similar content that we talk about on the podcast. Key insights from the podcast as well, and just generally stuff that I learn and stuff that I do. So see you. Thanks.